Welcome to the No More Drafts podcast. I'm Louise Corinwe, and this is the podcast for people who are tired of slow progress, tired of overthinking things and waiting to feel ready before taking action. Each week, we unpack the fears, the patterns, and stories that keep you stuck in ways you may not even realize, so that you can take your next step forward, your next courageous action, and move towards doing your life's work and building a life that's bigger than fear. Together, we move you out of perpetual draft mode and into done mode. So, what are we talking about today? Welcome back in, everyone. Let's take a quick sip of my coffee, which I'm in need of today. Today we're talking about not overlooking the obvious when it comes to making progress and productivity, because the thing is, hacks are so helpful. But although hacks are wonderful, they're not everything. There's often a missing piece of the puzzle that gets overlooked. And as someone who often has multiple thoughts going through their head and tends to lean towards, so it's not where I stay, but it's what my default can often be, which is to look at the complexity of things. My mission over the last, I'd say, 6 years, and really I see it as a lifelong commitment, has been to become a master of simplifying the complex. So I'm always looking to see, how can we make this simple? And at least, because not everything can be simplified, but at least what I seek to do, and I do this with my clients as well, is to at least make the first step something simple, something that is within reach and something that is obvious. And when I used to work as a career consultant for a HR consulting firm, I helped people with career changes and career transformation and pivots. And I would always guide them to make their first step in their career transformation or pivot something that was the closest to them, the most obvious and achievable step. And there's many benefits to doing that. First of all, it just gets you going quicker. But sometimes actually the solution is very simple. And starting with the most simplest step opens up a plethora of opportunities and possibilities for you much of the time. It can also bring clarity as well when you start with the most achievable step. And sometimes the next best step is the thing that is most obvious. It is the thing that is the simplest, that is within reach. And I say this because sometimes we are striving to think of this complex, multifaceted productivity or progress system that covers all bases, that covers everything we could ever imagine we would need. And that in itself can become a stumbling block for us. That in itself can become an issue, because we're trying to take so much on. But sometimes if we're not doing the most essential thing, which is often the most obvious and simplest thing, that wonderful elaborate system that we've developed for productivity can collapse. It won't work. And the most basic, essential first step that you can take that is within reach, that is easy to assess, is to look at your environment. It's to look at what's immediately around you, but through the lens of friction. And what I mean by that is quite simply looking around you and reflecting and thinking about what in my environment is making my action and my progress harder than it needs to be. And friction is so important if you struggle with perfectionism or procrastination. Because if you're already leaning towards procrastination because of your perfectionism, then of course, one extra little thing, one small friction in your environment will only add to your woes. It will only create yet another blocker for you and exacerbate the negative impact of your procrastination. So I would actually say one of the first things that is helpful to do is to seek to remove friction. I don't think all friction can be removed because some of it you can't control, but you can at least identify the parts that you can control and look at removing those, because it only makes your attempts to overcome procrastination harder. And then you end up in this loop of feeling like you failed again or you've not done enough again, when actually there's something very simple that you could have done to remove friction in your immediate environment. Sometimes the solution that you need is closer than you think. And it's not that you need more discipline. It's that the conditions around you are badly designed. And this is especially important for perfectionists and procrastinators, especially if you're the people-pleasing kind. You are seeking to live up to other people's expectations and not disappoint. The standards you feel under pressure to meet are often coming from external sources. If you're that people pleasing kind of perfectionist or procrastinator, this is really important because you probably think that you are procrastinating, stalling, or afraid just because of you. You assume that the issue is just you, potentially. But in reality, we don't operate in a vacuum. We are shaped by layers of our environment. And that can include things like the people who are closest to us, the systems that we operate in, the wider culture around us. Throughout my professional experience, I've always either led a large scale change and transformation project, or what I've been working on has been part of a change and transformation initiative. And so change management has been a key part of my work for nearly 2 decades. And in order to deliver successful change, we will always look at the broader system because every component of a system is influenced by the other one. So if you want to make a change in one area, you've got to consider the influence and the effect that other areas have on it. An analogy that we often use in change management is that of a fish tank. Oftentimes in change management, you're asked to come in and change the fish. So imagine the fish are the employees, okay? And oftentimes we are asked to change the fish. But in reality, what fish do you know that is not influenced by the fish tank that they swim in? If the water is dirty, if the fish tank is too small, if the food they're given is not fit for purpose and actually damages the fish tank itself, then that fish is going to be a byproduct of that environment. That fish is going to undoubtedly be affected by the dirty tank, by the lack of food, by the small space, the cramped tank. That fish is going to be affected. And so in my work, I would never dream of implementing any change in management initiative. So let's say it's a cultural change project. We're trying to change how leaders behave or how certain employees behave. I would never imagine implementing such an initiative without first looking at the tank. So the environment, the broader organizational factors that impact the behavior of that leader or that impact the behavior of those employees that influence their decisions and their beliefs. So why, when we are seeking to change how we do things, whether it's to improve something or start something or stop something, why do we think that looking at our broader environment shouldn't be a key part of it? And it's the bit that we often miss and underestimate as well. We underestimate the significance of our environment, of the people around us, the systems we're operating in, and even the culture we're living in as well. Like I said, we don't have power over all of this. We can't influence all of it. But in keeping with what I shared earlier, we can look at what's immediately in our circle of control. We can look at what's immediately accessible to us and just quite simply start there. So you do not operate in a vacuum. Your behavior is not happening in isolation. Your procrastination is not happening in isolation. Your performance is not happening in isolation. Our job is to become aware of what factors are actually influencing us and then determine which elements we can either control, manage, or limit, and even increase their influence depending on what it is, and which ones we can stop completely or remove, and then which ones may we have to just accept and find workarounds and coping mechanisms to handle them. And we don't talk about this enough when it comes to making progress. And especially if you procrastinate, you will hyperfixate on the fact that you procrastinate and not always look at those environmental factors, those systemic factors that influence you day to day that you may not even realize are doing so. And so this is why I get my clients to do something that I call an environmental radar scan. And it's highly valuable to do this or something like this periodically in order to notice some of the friction that is in your environment that has been there for so long, you don't recognize it, or you've become almost numb to it. But doing a scan of your environment can give you some quick wins that are simple and often easy to implement, but have a huge ripple effect on everything else. So as you do your environmental radar scan, you're thinking about what's mine to work on here. What is causing me friction? And what is mine to work on? What can I address? Then you're also identifying what belongs to the environment, what is outside your control. And then based on what is yours to work on, what needs to be completely changed, what can be left alone. Maybe you just leave it for now and find a workaround instead. So 2 things that you can really emphasize when you're doing your environmental radar scan is firstly, what is creating friction? And second, to quite literally look at your space. So, in terms of friction, friction is anything in your environment that makes your action required for your progress harder to start, harder to sustain, or harder to come back to. So it's really about assessing the conditions around the task that can either make it impossible to do or harder to do. And you don't need to identify everything now. Some of it also is dependent on you knowing what you need because it will be different for every person. So, for instance, for me, I have so many notebooks. I love notebooks. And if I was to just write my goals down in a notebook or my objectives or things I want to do, I would lose them, I would forget them, and they would just stay in that notebook, really, looking pretty. And that started to become friction for me. Having to find the notebook, open it up, try and identify the right page in the notebook. And that started to worsen my procrastination because now thinking about what I had to do that week or that day meant trying to locate this notebook, find the right page, and then read the goal. So for me, I stopped using them. I stopped capturing my goals and objectives in notebooks alone, at least. And I began to set up my own visual progress board based on a Japanese management system and technique called Kanban, which I talk about in one of my videos. Visualizing not only my long-term goals and my short-term objectives meant that all I had to do to remind myself of what my priorities were was just to look up above my desk, and it was all there. And the thing is, we're all prone to distraction and we're all inundated all the time with expectations, things pulling on our time, things pulling on our attention. And for me, I just found that I needed that constant visual reminder of what I was meant to be doing, just to reorient and re-anchor me in where I'm going and what I need to do next. It could be as simple as going away on a 2-week holiday. That alone is enough to make you come back and think, oh gosh, what am I doing again? A couple of years ago, me and my husband went on a 3-week trip to Japan. We went to Japan for like 2.5 weeks and then we went to South Korea. And when I got back from that 3-week trip, I just said, what am I doing again? Who am I? I forgot the login to my work laptop. I forgot passwords. So much can happen in 3 weeks. But having my goals, my priorities visually on that board immediately helped me get back into my flow again. This may not work for everyone. For some people, they love a notebook. The notebook is everything for them. And for some people, the friction of having to go and find the notebook, open it up, find the page and read it again is not a big deal. This is why I said it's personal to a large extent, because what creates friction for you may not create friction for another person. That's why the goal here is to identify what is causing that for you and how can you get rid of it, reduce it, or change it. And if you can't change it, find a workaround that works for you. And sometimes the goal is not to add another productivity hack. The goal should be to remove the friction or find a way to navigate it. So when you're thinking about this environmental radar scan and what in your environment is causing or creating friction and how can you limit it, change it, or find a workaround, some things you might want to scan and look around at are resources. Are there any resources missing? It could be as simple as having the right keyboard, right? Maybe at the moment you're straining your wrists and that makes working more uncomfortable and you subconsciously therefore maybe avoid it or aren't as excited about it. Do you have all the resources and the tools that you need to make whatever it is you're trying to do either easier or more enjoyable? Even getting a wireless Bluetooth keyboard would not cause too much strain or effort. That would be quite a simple solution. I'm not saying that's what it is, right? But that's just an example of something it could be. It could be something practical that you need, a resource, or it could be a piece of software. It could also be a skill. So what resources are missing for you in your environment? For me, my visual progress board was one of them. And I help people set up their visual progress boards. And they always say to me, not only has this transformed how I see my goals and kept me consistent and focused, it's changed how I see progress and how I celebrate my wins and my successes. So a small change can have a huge ripple effect on everything else. So are there any resources missing in your environment that are creating friction? Another thing that people overlook are the people in their environment. Again, we have really no control over other people, but again, we can change the people around us. We can find workarounds to handle some of the friction that people around us might be creating. And we underestimate the power of having, for instance, thinking partners, people who we can bounce ideas off to help us gain further insight and understanding. And that can create a lot of friction for us when we're just not fully clear, either on our next immediate step or on the purpose and the why and the vision of what we're doing. And so many people are trying to do this alone, trying to make progress solo. So do you have all the people in your environment that will help you and that will reduce friction as well? And if not, what do you need to add? What can you change? Or how can you adapt? So what are the resources missing in your environment, especially practically speaking as well? Who are the missing people in your environment that could help reduce friction or help you mitigate its negative impacts? And is there anything in your physical space that is not conducive? And how can you limit the impact that that has as well, or find another alternative to addressing the friction in your physical space? I mean, companies literally design their stores to influence how we buy, from the smells in the store to the layout of the store to the location of the store. They spend millions and millions to intentionally design their store and pick the location in a way that influences our behavior and how we shop and what we buy and how much we buy. They also invest millions into designing their offices in a way that will shape and influence how we work. I remember I once worked at a company who gave you free dinner. You know, your meal was free in the evening if you worked past a certain time. Now, subconsciously, that will influence many people to stay working later than planned, because they know they can order and expense food as their meal. And why not? You know, if you've not got a family that you have to get back to, you get free food. So we see companies investing millions into their environments, whether it's their store or the offices that they use. Yet we so often underestimate and ignore the home space in which we execute our goals and our dreams. Space is not just decor. Space cues focus. Space can also cue avoidance or pressure and procrastination. So if your physical space is set up for distraction, for friction, then naturally, of course, your focus will be affected. Of course, you will lean more towards procrastination and avoidance. So I encourage you to think about, what is your space training you to do? What does your space make easy? What does your space make hard? And what does your space remind you of? And then what can you remove, adapt and change, improve, or just find a workaround for if it's not something that you can actually change or influence? But I bet you'll be surprised at how many things come up and how simple it is to make some of these adaptations and changes. And yet further still, the big impact those small changes have. So I leave you with this small challenge today, and I'd love to know. Email me at nomoredrafts@gmail.com if you do this and what came up for you. But the small challenge for you is to look at your environment, the people, the resources, the physical space, and identify what is actually secretly making avoidance and procrastination easier for you right now. What is helping you do it? Because that in itself is friction. And how can you remove it, simplify it, change it, improve it, or work around it? That is my challenge for you this week. Don't forget to let me know how you get on with it. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next one. The No More Drafts podcast is about movement, not perfection. So before you go, what can you move out of draft mode this week and into imperfectly done? Even if it's a mess, and even if you don't feel ready yet. And if you want more support, come and join me on YouTube, where you'll find me as Louise Corinwe, and also follow the No More Drafts podcast, which is on YouTube as well. And if you want live community support and accountability with group coaching from me, join the Done Mode Collective by signing up to my newsletter. And most importantly, if this episode helped you in any way, don't overthink it. Just share it with someone whose potential is way too big to stay stuck in their head.